Welcome to this amazing episode of The Inspired Evolution. We've got with us Marc Champagne, who's written a book called Socratic Questions. This is an ode to journaling, right? And for someone like myself, I've got an amazing meditation practice, touch wood. I love music. I've got a really good practice around self-reflection through meditation and whatnot. However, journaling was just one of those things that has always called me, but I've never really been able to just click into it. So this conversation was really helpful for me, and I trust and know that it's going to be super supportive for you. One of the things that I often muse upon was journaling. Like all these amazing people that have left a legacy in history all seem to have pretty remarkable journals. Now, was it such that these are remarkable people and they happen to journal? Or was journaling such a powerful tool that these people were remarkable people? I don't know, just where my little kooky little head goes, just as sort of something to think about. So in this episode, Marc goes deep on questions, right? His whole thing, he built an app which had 87 million followers dedicated to basically a line of questioning, the Socratic method, yeah? And his book modernizes the Socratic method for us to basically apply in our own lives in this modern era, makes it much more palatable. And it's all about getting clear with yourself, getting super intentional with yourself so you can take really clear and massive action, but it doesn't have to feel so huge. Yeah. So it's an incredible, incredible conversation. The questions, man, this is maybe we're just two podcasting nerds nerding out on questions, but it's a really incredible, incredible conversation about questioning, right? And learning to ask really empowering questions, such as one of the questions that really changed Marc's life was, what do I really want for my life? Yeah. Now you hear that all the time. That may be a question you may have considered even, right? But have you really taken the time to engage with that question? And we talk about the blocks in terms of why some of these deep questions, like, what do I really want for my life? You know, even as I'm saying that to you, some part of you is going, oh yeah, that's a great question. I'll ask myself later. Some part of you is going, oh yeah, let me ask myself now. And some part of you gets really cloudy because it's like, what do I really want? And this and what are all those resistance pieces? Tune into the episode. Let's have a conversation about all of that, yeah? And there's some awesome questions in there, like these imagine if questions and how that just opens your mind. And also how to move through some of your stuff in life, like what lessons am I tired of continuously learning, right? Some really deep questions, but some real good work embedded in those questions. What am I hearing? What is my intuition saying to me? What can I celebrate right now? So a gorgeous, gorgeous episode. I know you're going to love this. I know it's going to help you transform. And I'm excited to put these practices, all the learnings from this episode into practice in my own life. And I hope it supports you on yours as well. As always, if these episodes are inspiring you on your evolution, please do us a solid, hit subscribe. And there's going to be a moment, I know there is, in this episode where you're like, oh, aha moment, boom. Yeah, at that moment, hit the thumbs up, give us a like. And anything that's coming through the episode you want to have a chat about, hit it up in the comment section below. That's me writing right back to you. I'd love to stay in touch with you. As always, tribe, stay inspired, keep evolving. Love you. Aside from my soul, welcome to the Inspired Evolution, and it is a treat to be here today. We have with us Marc Champagne. Marc, how are you there, brother?
I am 100%. I feel like I'm 150 after that yell. That was great.
Welcome to the Inspired Evolution. So just tuning in, for those tuning into Marc for the first time, he is a podcast, Behind the Human Dude. You're going to check it out. He has recently written a book, Socratic Questions. Can't wait to dive into that. And he's a great human to get onto the show. It is such a pleasure to have you here. Bro, can we also have a chat at some point about mental health, fitness and stuff like that? There's so much that, we could unpack in this conversation. I love your interests. I love your curiosities. So it's a real pleasure for us to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thank you. I can't wait. I mean, there's definitely a lot of overlap in what we're both passionate about. So it should be a really great conversation.
Yeah, totally agreed. So, bro, the book you wrote on Socratic Questions, you're starting to ask people questions and lines of questioning that can actually help them improve their lives, ask better questions of ourselves. What was the I'm sure like questions, something like meditation, something like music, like it's probably something that's been in your field, in your awareness since like longer than potentially you probably could imagine.
Yeah.
But when was there was there a clear sort of, moment where it was like, oh, questions. And did it just come from podcasting? Because I know that made me better at questions. Or like, is there more to it? Can you illuminate it to us where
Yeah,
this really sparked?
absolutely. I mean, there's a huge inflection point where there was a realization that, at least that I made, that we're all of us, doesn't matter where we're at in life, we're all one question away from a completely different life or outcome.
Mm.
And I got to that because I was in a period in my life, probably the most challenging years of my life, essentially, and that's when I was running a digital journal called Keo, or wellness company, and we had reached 86.9 million people with that app in terms of App Store impressions. It was a wild ride. All these features, a lot of the people before we hit record that we mentioned that we have, an overlap with, they were in that app providing their questions, their
Mm-hmm.
reflective questions to help guide people into a journaling practice. And long story short, I mean, we reached a lot of people. There was a lot of hype. There were a lot of collaborations, a lot of press, but the business model just wasn't working. And we couldn't
Mm.
financially keep it going. And I think we were mentally tapped out as well. And I only share that because I'll never forget. I was in Toronto, Canada, in a co-working space, sitting there behind my laptop by myself. And I was about to hit delete from App Store. And I'm looking at this number, 86.9 million people, thinking, how could we fail at such a colossal level? I mean, there are millions of apps, and most
How does
apps,
your gut feel
right?
in that moment, bro?
Oh, it was brutal, but it was even worse as the weeks went on, because what that led to was a deletion of an app, but a deletion of my identity for the last 3 years. And I had legitimately found the work that lights me up, and around this concept of mental fitness and providing a different narrative to the practices. But I just deleted the vehicle that was supposed to help continue my path in that space, right? So what happened eventually in the podcast was helpful because it provided a pause or a reframe to remember, well, wait a second, I've interviewed hundreds of incredible humans, and they're asking a very different set of questions than what I'm asking right now. Because what I was asking were questions that were leading me down a deeper hole. They weren't getting me out of the situation. They were kind of why did this happen? And now what, for example, but not in a progressive, like motivating way, until I stumbled on the idea of just asking myself one question. And it was, well, what do I want for my life? And then that provided the unlock to then follow what I now know is essentially a Socratic method, and why I wrote Personal Socrates was that then it led to the next question, and the question after that, well, who do I need to speak with to fulfill kind of what I'm looking for? What do I need to do next? What's one step to take today that I can, get closer and closer to essentially that picture that I mapped out in terms of what I wanted for my life? And it brought back the hope, because the hope is what was lost in that, hitting that delete from App Store. So that's how questions entered, or how that inflection point came up, and just then really starting to think about, well, wait a second, we all ask questions all the time. It's just, are we asking the right ones, right? And are we asking enough of them? And most importantly, are we asking the right questions at the right time, right? Because you and I can reflect on a question, and it could really land with me based on where I'm at in my life right now, and not land with you, but maybe in 6 months it will, right? So this is where this is where I really became obsessed with the questions, because again, everyone's asking them. And when you start paying attention, you can pick them up. And now I'm a bit, I've got a list of hundreds of these prompts, essentially, from all walks of life. And it's almost impossible to read a book or read anything really and not flip it into some sort of reflective question, which I guess is good and bad. But anyway, that's the answer.
The boon and the curse. Wow, man. Thank you so
Yeah.
much for sharing that. And there's a lot to unpack in there. Like, just that moment for going from like, yeah, having developed something that reaches almost 100 million people, and then just literally, yeah, saying goodbye to it. There
Gone.
must be so much in that. But I love, and this is one of the things that keeps coming up on the Inspired Evolution. It comes up a lot in my coaching as well, and we talk about this, and it's a bit annoying for some people because they'll come on to the coaching journey, and I'll sit there, and they're going through like something really turbulent, and I'm smiling, and they're like, it's kind of out of context, like your smile. And I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, but I kind of know that you've just put in like so much mileage. You're about to break through. Like I've just seen this time and time again. And I often say that like our biggest challenges lead to our biggest gifts. And I'm not surprised that having gone through like such a seismic sort of and public sort of bagonk that, this golden nugget of, questions
Yeah.
came through. So I just see it time and time again. And in there, the thing that came to me when you said that was, the question, what do I want for my life? Yeah, it's such a beautiful question. Even as I say it, I can kind of feel just how opening, like it just opens me up. Um, However, the thing that sort of there's a rub in there because I think a lot of us have thought about questions like this. Yeah. But
Yeah.
rarely do we engage with the question. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Rob? Like we often think about questions, but I don't think we often like engage with the question in a quality that actually can be transformative.
It's a really good point. And I think what happens is that it depends on where we're at in life and where our mind is at. And I guess another way to say it is that sometimes we ask these questions, but we actually don't want the answer to the question. Or the answer is scary, right? Like think of a question like as simple as, am I happy? I mean, it's either yes or no, maybe a bit in between, but pretty much yes or no. And if it's no, I mean, you have a choice there, right? Like either you just accept that and that's how it is, or you have to make some sort of change. And the change, is messy at first, but it gets better and then it's beautiful at the end. But at the beginning, it's challenging. So I think that's what happens. And it's, again, this is where the timing of a question is really impactful. And this is how the book is framed up and how the app was set up. But it's just, if you land on a prompt based on, where you're at right now in your life and it resonates and it helps you through whatever you may be dealing with, then you start training your mind to slow down and take that pause, which is what I think questions do. They give us the pause, right? Pause from whatever's going on, pause from the autopilot and start to think a bit. And then you think, and then another thing comes up and another prompt or another practice. And then all of a sudden you start getting into, essentially like our world, right? Of that's exponential in terms of what you can do and what's next and so forth in a positive way. So for me, it's whatever I can do to help people find that initial question that's going to land right now. Then it opens up a dialogue with yourself, right? And others eventually.
I find that fascinating, that dialogue with yourself, because the questions really do illuminate where you're at. You said that you mentioned this earlier in terms of, you were asking a certain type of questions and people that, you were speaking to were asking a different caliber of questions or different type of question, let's say. And in there you find yourself sort of asking this, why me? Why this way? And it's there's languaging's a bit interesting, but there's like these victim-esque kind of questions
Yeah.
versus these empowering sort of questions. But when I've tuned into your work, I used to think, and obviously I was led a lot by Simon Sinek and the power of why, in terms of going, it is probably a better question to ask why rather than how, rather than what. But then I, tuning into your work, realized that potentially asking what could be a better question if it's just focused on the next, like, what do I do
Yeah.
from here? It could be like a very progressive next step, and it could be much more constructive than always being stuck in like the why. It's good to have you why, but
Yeah.
then Yeah, can you elaborate? Like I'm
Yeah.
fishing around here with the like
No, no, no. I've thought about this a lot because
yeah.
I also follow Simon's work, and I think the multiple whys is important, and definitely important in business and different cases like that. But it can be detrimental if you get into a why loop with the victim mode, right? Because then now you're stuck and you just start looping. And that's what was happening. I remember, I mean, after I hit delete, there was so much going on because I mean, that again, I didn't know what was next. That was the first time in my life where I didn't feel like I had a plan forward. And my backup plan, which was to return back to that corporate world that I had left, just didn't feel right anymore because I could feel that the work I was doing was what I should be doing and that's what I'm in now. But I had no plan, right? So you get into this loop, but at one point, it's good to learn from what happened, but then you've got to cut it and I think move forward. And those what type of questions or the hows and whatnot allow you to progress forward. I mean, just someone that you had on your show previously, John Azarath, I mean, I wrote a profile about him specifically on these progressive questions, right? Like something as simple as imagine if, opens up and removes all limits that we set off, and it just allows our imagination to run wild. And even if we're not seeking a specific, out there answer, let's say, at least puts your mind in a mental state to allow for that dialogue with yourself to happen, right? And then all of a sudden you're in a better mood, and next thing you know, you're having a conversation with someone else, and an opportunity pops up, versus being stuck in this fear loop, which I think happens when you get stuck in some of these why looping questions in those kind of circumstances. So, right. So it's whatever we can do. And I often refer to what I called my happiness list, like the 5 or 10 things that I knew without a shadow of a doubt would put a smile on my face. And again, that allows you to pause that, negative internal dialogue or that New York Times bestselling story that we can all loop up really fast in our minds, right? That feels so real, and shut down our thinking, right? Because it's so hard to think clearly when you're in a survival state. You can do it, but it's challenging, and it's definitely not where you're going to perform at your best. So I remember like those times in my life were really gratitude and present moment all the time, as much as I could, should just, again, pause that narrative, get out of that, not ignore feelings or suppress things. There's time to process that. And I would leverage journaling and my men's group to do a lot of that work, but not when you're trying to, you're in the middle of the day and you're trying to move forward in your steps and move towards your plan. Like that's when gratitude and, like I said, the present moment or that happiness can then flip you into that creation state and get your mind back in a thriving, motivated, even if it's for 30 minutes, right? You can create so much in that time.
Yeah, I love that. My curiosity just wants to go here.
Yeah, go for it.
You've got 5 things on your happiness list. What are they?
Oh, you know what? That's a great question because they change all the time. I mean, the key is that it has to relate to you, right? So for me right now would be mountain biking in the forest, long walks, hikes. I shouldn't even say long. I mean, just a walk in general. I mean, what I've been really trying to do lately is to take a 10 or 15-minute walk after lunch. There's some health benefits there, obviously, in terms of processing what you just ate, but then also just getting outside in nature and sun. So those exercises are on there. Without fail, a Peloton spin for me flips me into a wild, motivated mood. Before jumping on this show with you, I took 5 minutes. I was listening to Foo Fighters, and that, music for so many people is a huge trigger, right? So again, like we have access to all of this stuff. And again, it's just listing it out and having that either mentally or physically in front of you, knowing that you can default to that list at any point, right? Because then it doesn't matter whether you're upset or fearing something or have anxiety. If you pop back into that list, you can pause that and reframe whatever's going on. Beautiful. Yeah, so those are a few things on my list, at least right now.
I love that. Mark, so help me out. So I'm really good at making lists, like really good at making lists, like exceptional list maker. Like if you saw my phone, you'd just be like, oh, he just has a list thing.
Yeah.
He calls people.
List master.
Yeah, pretty much, right? So really good at making lists. I wouldn't say I've actually, let's be real about it. Yeah, I think I struggle with journaling. I struggle with journaling. And what comes up for me is I never really know where to start
Yeah.
and how deep to stop going. I don't know, does that sound like very self-indulgent or something? But like, when something comes up, it's like I'll start talking about it and it's like, at which point did what I'm trying to write about begin? And
Mm.
then I'll sort of go into story and narrative. And then I tune into a lot of Tim Ferriss's work, and it was like, don't go into story. Like he writes on the top of every page, don't go into story, and then just write. But then I
Yeah.
found I had nothing to write if I wasn't going into story. It was just like, so I was like, maybe this journaling thing, is, I have meditative, like I'll go away on a meditation retreat and things will come through and I'll download and I'll write a little bit about them for sure.
Sure.
But outside of my integrated sort of day-to-day life, I never really find the sort of, just the flow to write, if that's the right way
Yeah,
to sort of put it.
absolutely.
Any advice? How would I crack through this? Like when you approach a blank page, is there some sort of tips, advice that you have in this space?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I mean, you're not alone, and I think there's probably 87 or 86.9 million people that have some sort of struggle with that as well, or they would have downloaded or approached our app in the past, right? But first, before any of that, I would love to leave yourself as well as the listeners with just a reframe on journaling and the definition, because I think sometimes we get hung up with journaling as this pen to paper. I used to get this all the time. Oh, you're talking about the diary, or the girl writing in her diary about the boy at school or something, right? Which there's nothing wrong with that, but yes and no. There's so many different ways to journal. So stereotypically, we think of pen to paper or in an app of some sort, and we're writing. But the practice itself is reflection, right? It's the act of reflecting. So if you're taking a walk and thinking, or if you're, coming back, like you said, from your meditation retreat and you're driving, or whatever, you're on the airplane, like whatever it is, and you're taking some time to just be still and think and process. And usually there are questions involved there. To me, that is journaling. And, writing down pen to paper, I mean, there's science there. There's benefits to doing that, especially when it comes to any type of visualizations and things like that, or intention setting, I should say. But regardless, so forget about the vehicle and just think about what works best in your routine, in your rituals, that you can provide 5 or 10 minutes of stillness to think, right? That's at the base. Then I think what I'm hearing from you is a struggle in long form free writing of some case, which doesn't have to, maybe that's not your thing, or maybe it's only something that when you feel compelled to go to it after, a retreat of some sort, and you feel like there's stuff that you want to unpack. Or because the other thing too, a lot of us, we often talk about journaling from we're processing emotion, we're dealing with hard times, but there's the flip side of it, again, of visualizing the life, the work, how you want people to feel after a phone call or a presentation or a keynote, right? Like writing out that detail. There's all these different things you can do. But if you're struggling to get started, I would suggest that's when you start with prompts, right? And it's something like I start pretty much every day trying to start the day with a 5-minute journaling practice. And usually at the end of the day before, not the end of the day before I go to sleep, but the end of my work day, to bookend the day, I'll jump back into that journal. And the question to start the day is typically, how am I feeling? Where am I feeling that in my body? What am I hearing right now? Sometimes I jump into that in the middle of the day. There's a lot going on. It seems like there's an opportunity here. There's something I'm thinking about here, but what am I really hearing? Like tapping into the intuition and then unpacking that a bit. And it could just be a couple minutes. And then at the end of the day, what can I celebrate about the day? And it's just a beautiful way, right? Because we forget, we do so many things, but we forget all of the awesome that takes place each and every single day. And I mean the small things. Oh, so-and-so actually wrote back to my email, or I booked this, and it quickly disappears into, if it's not this catalytic event, then, it doesn't stay in the memory. So these are great ways to just, again, keep your mind motivated and primed and grateful for all of the awesome taking place. And that's journaling, right there. That's reflection, I should say.
Yum. I love it. It's like a whole, wow. There's so much space in that response. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, I can really feel how, it's removed this, because you're right. What it looked like for me was this Dear Diary and me going into it.
Yeah.
But in the regards that you're sort of illuminating to, I make lists similar to that. Like I'll think about something and it's like, oh, actually that's come through and I should probably jot it down, and I'll just punch it into my phone. But I love the question around what am I hearing, just tapping into your intuition that way, first thing, like what's coming through,
Yeah.
And celebrations, like one of my highest values, those that tune into the episode, you guys know that, know me like that. And what can I celebrate at the end of the day? It's such a gorgeous way to sort of tap into that. Just
and you can do an audio
magic
note too if you want to answer it in that way, right? That's another great way to do it.
Yeah. Do you find yourself ever like coming back to what you've journaled? Do you do that regularly, or is it just something that's in the process to sort of get what's in your space out, and then you can sort of move on with more clarity? Is it multi-purpose? Like what's the
that's actually really I like that question, because that hits home in terms of where I'm at right now with the practice. And I felt myself evolve because before, and I think a lot of people think about, a practice like journaling like this, and you get hung up on, again, the vehicle. It's like if you're pen to paper, I'm only going to buy these red journals and I'm going to stack them up on my shelf as they fill them up, and I want to see them. Like there's dialogue like that, and you probably never open them up again. And sometimes you do, and everyone's different. But and then there are all these different apps that are out there as well. And we used to see this in our space. It's like you don't want to switch around because you want everything in one place and so forth. And there is validity to some of that. And I'm experiencing that in somewhat of a case with an app that I use, or that I've used even before I started my company, which is called Day One. I like to think of them as like the grandfather of digital journaling. And I've got thousands of entries in there. And there's one feature they have that shows me, here is your entry 5 years from now. And that's the only time. Sometimes I'll tap on that, and it's interesting to go back and look at, what I wrote, because you start picking up patterns. Say, wow, I'm writing about, I don't, let's pick financials, because I think most people can relate. I'm writing about something financially driven. The circumstances and details are all completely different than right now, but basically the feeling is the same. And it's an interesting reflection, right? Because then you can think, well, okay, well, what do I need to change there? Like maybe I need to change my relationship with how I think about money, or whatever it is, right? So there is a benefit there. But here's where I'm evolving, at least I think so. What I've noticed over the years is that I will journal pen to paper, app, audio note, on a Post-it, whatever. What's key is that I've been doing it when I need it. I mean, other than some of those bookends and like building it into my own morning practices and whatnot. But if something comes up in the middle of the day, to not worry about the medium and just stop. And again, focus on the practice of reflection. Maybe I'll take a walk, think about a question. What do I want to say? For example, when I was writing the book, if I get stuck, well, what am I trying to say? And just take a break and go through that reflection, because I need it right now, right? And not getting hung up on, well, I need to document that somewhere in a physical journal so that it's on the shelf. So I kind of answered the question probably with two opposing answers, but I mean, I do think, at least I find that they're both helpful in different situations.
Yeah, yeah. No, what I'm hearing is, yeah, what I heard in that is it's more about you utilizing the tool as a method of moving through your stuff,
Yeah,
and getting more and more intimate with yourself in the moment. And it's handy if it is there in the future, but it doesn't form the crux of why
yeah,
we're journaling. Which I think is, yeah, I'm glad I asked that question, because I think for some of us, yeah, it can be that's like, oh yeah, I'm trying to keep a documentation of where my life and journey went. One of the
yeah.
things that I've often remarked upon is like some of the greatest figures in history kept journals. And maybe this is just the kooky world that Amrit lives in, but these are the kind of things I think about. Thinking, oh, but I was like, were they the remarkable figures and they happened to keep journals? Or were they remarkable figures because they had a practice of self reflection, as you're describing, and the journaling supported them in their path to doing something remarkable? Something you've thought
Wow.
about for sure, right?
Yeah, that's a really great question and reflection. I mean, I'm biased, obviously, because I study this stuff, but I have yet to find, including over 200 interviews now, a
Mm,
person that has come on or someone that I've studied that doesn't have some sort of reflective practice in their
mhm,
life. Because I think it's what I've noticed with these individuals is that they're doing everything possible to not go on to an autopilot.
mm,
And a lot of these practices allow for that pause so that you're not doing that, so that you're thinking.
mhm.
And I mean, we're all human. And I think, I wrote a profile on Marcus Aurelius, and kind of a perfect example of thousands, this stuff has been around for thousands of years. I mean, I'm not inventing journaling. I'm not inventing new questions.
Mhm,
What I'm trying to do is bring the practice to light in a modern narrative, so it
mhm,
lands where we can all use it. But people like Marcus Aurelius, where fighting these multiple year long battles,
battles.
and right, and then I can't remember the stat. It's in the book, but I think he lost something like 12 or 13 of his children. I mean,
Mm,
can you imagine, right? I
no.
mean, just in today's day, I mean, I'm a dad. I've a 5-year old, and I've got another one on the way in December. And
Ah,
just
congrats.
even, thank you. Just
Yeah.
even the thought of losing one child, I mean,
Yeah.
completely, wrecks wrecks lives, essentially, right? So,
Mhm,
I mean, and you can read about his meditations and his journals is in his essentially it's his journal, meditations is what it's
mhm,
called. That's how he's processing all of this stuff and processing decisions, and going back and working on his interior empire, right? And I
mhm,
see this with all of them.
mhm,
Again, they're all slightly different. They may be journaling in different ways, but they're all reflecting. So I
mhm,
think that's the commonality. And again, I mean, there's just so much. Now the science is catching up, so you can
mhm,
see the benefits there. Same with meditation. I mean, it's not like that's not new, and the
mhm,
science is catching up to show, wow, you're actually reprogramming your mind in many ways, especially in journaling too, all the
mhm.
neuroplasticity and all that fun jazz that's happening. So yeah, to answer your question, I do believe that they're using practices like this,
Mm.
to be able to perform at the top.
Support themselves in that way. Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
loving this conversation. So it's an ode to self-reflection. You've got a meditation nerd and a journaling nerd. Sorry for calling you a
Yeah.
nerd. A
Yeah.
nerd and
Oh,
out
that's
on
totally fine.
self-reflection. This is awesome. One of the things that you mentioned in there, which I think, yeah, is I'd just like to sort of zoom in on for a sec, is this going in on autopilot, and disrupting the autopilot. And you found like everybody's awesome, but let's just call them the greats just for the ease of articulating in this conversation.
Sure.
Disrupting the autopilot, which is what a lot of the greats are trying to do. And I often find myself doing this. And language can be super helpful, as I know you know. Like there was this word that I learned which really irked me for a while. When I first came across it, was the word was mentation. And
Okay.
when I learned what mentation was, I was just like, oh no, because the mentation is like the recycling of stale thought. Yeah. And
Oh, wow.
thinking
Okay.
is like fresh thought. Yeah. And
Sure.
then when I realized, oh, like I've just been mentating this whole time. Like I think I've been thinking,
Yeah.
but actually I've just been like chewing on the same sort of like nub for
Yeah.
like it's in my frustrations, sometimes months. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah. And that was like this huge realization where it's like, oh, am I actually thinking? Like, is this a fresh thought? Like, am I thinking like creatively actually
Sure.
disrupt the autopilot and go, okay, can I take some time to think? Or am I just thinking that I'm thinking and it's just like the autopilot, which you referred to, is just on loop and I'm just still chewing on the same nub? Um, yeah, the disruption of the autopilot, like how important is that in the work that you're doing?
Yeah.
And what are some of the like questions obviously help us do that? What are some of the questions that you prefer or have found that really just cut through the autopilot?
Yeah. I mean, the prompt that comes to mind immediately is, what lesson are you tired of relearning over and over again? Right. And I
Ouch.
mean, we can all answer that, right? I mean, the simplest things, like probably the one that's easiest to relate to is nutrition, or what
Mm,
you're eating, right? Or if you're trying to, you know, eat healthier or be healthier. I mean, we know what's healthy and what's not. I mean, we're smart humans, right? And we
mm,
also can see through a lot of the marketing out there from the food companies. Like, we know that chocolate bar or whatever is not, it's not the thing that's going to
mhm,
fuel our health. You're either fueling health or you're fueling disease.
mhm,
It's either or type thing. So a question like that, I mean, that I'm using nutrition obviously as an example, but there's so many other different things. You can use that question for relationships,
mhm,
right? And unpacking relationships that maybe at one point served you,
mhm,
and that's great. And again, celebrate that relationship. But we're humans; we all evolve. Maybe it's time to let that one go, and that's
mhm,
okay too, right?
mhm,
So the thing is, though, what's fun about this stuff is that by default, if you start putting, again, meditation, obviously, journaling, breath work, like any of these practices, and you start building them into your routine on a daily basis, even if it's for 5-10 minutes, then you're just becoming more and more clear. So
mhm,
you start seeing the autopilot, right? Whereas before you might not have seen that. And
mhm,
that, again, that's just what it's interesting. The structure of the book came about halfway through writing it. And the structure is super simple. It's part one is all about getting clear. Part two
mhm,
is then about being intentional with how we're thinking and how we're acting. And then by default, what happens when you're doing those things is exponential opportunity shows up because you can see it.
mhm,
But that
mhm.
doesn't happen if you're looping and looping because you
Meditating.
haven't paused it yet, right?
Yeah,
To pause it
yeah.
and then get clear. And again, for me, that question looping all the way back was, what do I want for my life?
Mhm,
Now I'm clear on where I'm trying to go. Well, now I jump into the intentionality part. Well, this is what I need to do. And
mhm,
this is how I need to show up. And these are the practices that need to be non-negotiable in my life because they're the things that will keep my mind healthy. My
mhm,
mind is keeping the rest of my body and spirit healthy, right?
mhm,
I mean, my mind's the thing telling me to go exercise or take the walk or
mhm.
make that decision on what I'm eating. So
Yeah.
for me, it's always top priority to make sure the mental fitness is dialed in,
Mhm.
because then everything else follows.
I love that. I love that. And now we've dovetailed into that mental fitness. And like part of me wants to, in this conversation, take you off the hot plate and stop asking such deep questions, but I don't know how. We're just in
I'll
such
have
a
my
good
turn
place.
eventually. We're gonna book that one.
Because in my head, I was like, okay, so just ask him like, what are his 10 favorite questions? And it's like, yeah, but we'll get there. We'll
No,
get
this is
there.
good.
But like one of the things that was in there was yeah, just this opportunity to sort of dive into uh the questions that really, like, what do I want for my life is such a, I don't know how to articulate this question without going like, can you feel the anarchy in the question? Yeah, it's like, it's almost like a, yeah, that's the only way I can really frame it. There's like an anarchy in there, which is, what do I want for my life? And do you find that through self-reflection and through your practice, through asking some of these questions, and this is definitely not a conspiracy theory question, but it's not like, are we programmed to not ask good questions of ourselves? But the rub of like, why, and pardon my French, why the fuck do we
Yeah.
not ask better questions? Like, why were we not trained to? Why were we not conditioned to? Like, what's going on there? Like, this
Yeah.
is a great question, and taking that and chunking it and going down the path of that. It's so simple, like you said, right? But and we've spoken about the aversions to why we're going there, but we're also like externally not encouraged to sort of interface and ask these really deep, really supportive and profound questions.
Yeah. Well, I think we've been programmed to an illusion of productivity. I and this probably started in the Industrial Revolution years and eras and whatnot, when basically university and colleges were really firing up and training people and stuff like that. And if you think about it, in most modern jobs, it's how much stuff can I do in the day? How many meetings can I cram together and still get my work done? Simple as that. Well, there's no time to think there. And and I remember this when I was in that rat race for about 10 years essentially. And I just remember that the standard kind of operating procedure was, you either did your thinking super early in the morning before everyone came in, or you're working into the evening. And working into the evening, I mean, we are human. We do need breaks. So are you really doing, good thought there in those hours, for example? And I think most people that's where they're doing some of their thinking. So I'm not surprised that we don't ask these questions, to be completely honest, because society is not set up to support this type of thinking. It is moving. I think it's starting to shift. And it's part of the reason why I started my podcast in the first place, was to show that, let's talk to the strategist, or let's talk to the writer or the designer or the technologist, and see how he or she and how they think, and show that this stuff is accessible and that it can be used in your regular day, slowly by integrating these steps. It doesn't have to be this giant shake up to your routine, but eventually you get into a place where all of a sudden now your calendar starts to empty a little bit more from these meetings. You're more intentional because you're clear on what you're looking for. You're more intentional on who you're speaking with, what you're doing. And then you get to this place where it reminds me of someone I've interviewed, an artist in New York, Chantel Martin. And I remember asking her, I'm like, what have you noticed about your art, or how has it evolved over the years? Do you feel like you're really dialed into your craft right now? And she said, I noticed there's more white space on the canvas. And that comes with, and she said, who knows, maybe one day I'll just draw one line on the canvas and walk away. And she said, maybe I'll have the confidence to do that. But there's something to be said there. And it made me think, where can I have more white space in my life, in my work? Because that's where we feel good too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's thank you. Glad I asked that question. These
are great questions.
Touch wood.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What's been coming up for me this year is I wrote a book by Greg McKeown called Essentialism. And that sort of set the intention this year for simplicity. And the way you articulated, the way she answered your question really alludes to, one day I'll have the courage to just draw a line. It actually takes courage to simplify things down to that level, and just really, and the white space is a great description for it, because even in your head you can feel when there's lots of things going on, and it's like, oh yeah, I've got clarity and calmness of mind. It
Yeah.
feels like white space.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Well,
gorgeous.
the other example that, links well with essentialism and in just, I would say minimalism for the mind is that visual, right? Like you think, if you think of a library that's
Mhm.
loaded full of knowledge and all of this information, I mean, if you start tipping over all the bookshelves and everything's on the floor, it's, the information's there, but
Mhm.
it's going to take a hell of a lot longer to find it. And it's going to be a real challenge, and it's not going to be a pleasurable experience.
Mhm.
Often our minds are in that state because we have
Mhm.
all these looping emotions. We have relationships that are bothering us and all of this stuff that's going on that, again, if we can incorporate some of this mental fitness into our routines, well, we start blowing out all of the excess stuff. And next thing you know, you can see the path forward, right?
Mhm.
You can go, oh yeah, I know about that. I need to go here, for example. And there's just more mental clarity there. And, then again, then that's when you start seeing, yeah, I need to go down that route, or I need to call this person. It was
Mhm.
always there. It was just hidden behind all the boxes.
I love that. I love that. Okay, Mark. So mental fitness, we've mentioned it a couple of times. I feel like your Thor and the hammer is questioning what else is in the mental health fitness arsenal. Like, what's your shield? What's your armor? What else is in there? What keeps you
Yeah.
inspired? Yeah.
Well, just, are you asking just how I define mental fitness? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it came up, honestly, we talked about it earlier when I was working on the app and speaking to different people. Everyone had this description of what they thought, journaling was, for example. And if
Mm.
it wasn't that, in terms of the 12-year-old girl or whatever writing her diary, then it was immediately linked to some sort of mental health related
Mm.
situation, which both can be in check, but there's so much more,
It's
right?
not the
So
be all and end all. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. So, and I think, there's no, there's no hiding behind it. There's definitely a stigma related to mental health. And usually, you're entering into that. It's a challenge of some sort. Whereas what I like about mental fitness, the way I view it, it's the umbrella,
Mm.
under a mental fitness is mental health, is mental
Mhm.
resiliency, is, visualization, mental priming, all, like anything and everything that you can think of for the health and performance of your mind falls under that mental and fitness umbrella. The other thing, we can relate to physical fitness,
Mm.
and again, physical fitness, you're taking the step.
Mm.
You're the one in control of this, and that's what I like about talking how speaking about it in terms of mental fitness, because it
Mm.
feels like, and often is, well, yeah, I'm taking ownership of my mental fitness. I want to do this. I'm in
Mhm.
charge on this one, and all those other buckets are in there, but overall, it's in my court.
I love that. And feeling into, and I kind of know the answer to this question, but I'm gonna ask it anyway for the benefit of the audience. Um, how heavily do you prioritize mental fitness?
Oh yeah, I mean it's everything for me. I mean every day I'm doing something. Definitely Monday to Friday, I'm usually prioritizing an hour in the morning.
Mhm.
That includes a whole bunch of different things, to be honest, because what's important is the hour or
Mm.
whatever your time block is. If it's 10 minutes,
Mm.
that's awesome. So for me, what falls into that, usually some sort of reflection, usually some learning,
Mhm.
and usually some stillness. Those are
Mm.
the three big buckets, and they could be in different order, but I try not to put the pressure on myself to say I have to meditate or I have to journal,
Mm.
because then I'm defeating the point of the practice.
Mm.
Right? So, but as long as I know, hey, again, I have my list and you've got your list, you've got
Mhm.
many from what I understand. So you go default to the list and make sure that you're doing those things in that time.
Mhm.
I think it was Tim Ferriss or someone was interviewing a really well-known author. I can't remember her name now, but anyway, it's one of the huge like fiction authors, and she was
Mm.
just saying, I think the author of Eat, Pray, Love.
Ah,
Uh,
yep.
yeah, what's her name? I'm drawing a blank.
Not going to
But
come.
anyway, so she was saying at one point after, I think it was after that book, and she was working on her other novels, like her full-time job was her mind. Because, if her mind was out of check, or she was having a hard day, I mean, she couldn't do her work, right? So
Mm,
that was her full-time job for a good period of time, and I would imagine is still a huge priority.
mm, mm. Is it Elizabeth Gilbert? Is it?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank God, because that would have bothered me.
Gotcha, bro. So in there, yeah, there was a fluidity in there, which is gorgeous. Just having the hour or having the 10 minutes and subbing in whichever practice off the bench that you want to pull in, whether it's, and just having a general intention around there, whether it's, stillness, or whether stillness could be meditation, or it could be yin yoga, or it could be anything in there. Reflection could be just thinking about something, hopefully not meditating. Oh, I've got a pet peeve there. Or journaling. Yeah, and a little bit of learning, and that could come in many different variety of forms, especially in this day and age. Um, I think that's really awesome, because I often find, and I've worked with clients like this, where it's like, okay, now I've got to get in my sacred bath, I've got to get in my prayers, I've got to get in my meditation, I've got to get in my workout, and all of a sudden I'm waking up at 2:30 a.m. And it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, like I get it. But sleep is also really important too. And
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
how do you cram all this in? And I remember tuning into one of my there's a friend of mine at Mind Valley, and he made this video of this young budding entrepreneur, and it's a complete parody. At a certain point in the video, like, this person sneezes pills out of his nose, right? Because he's just like taking all the multivites. But his morning practice literally starts at 4 a.m. and it's about 10:30 at night that he's finally completed his morning practice, and he's ready to go to work, and he's realized it's time for bed. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty funny how deeply we can end up sort of, yeah, just trying to program everything in. And then I
Back to
find
that productivity mindset, right?
right? And I think it also can be, and that then also stifles us further, because it's like, this was meant to be a great tool, but now it's like I'm once again a victim of the tool. And I find oftentimes that that's our relationship. It just reflects our relationship with the mind,
Hmm.
because the mind is meant to be this incredible tool. And like, honestly, they're still inventing computers, but like, there isn't a better computer, in my humble
Oh
opinion.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
phenomenal, right? Like, it's this incredible tool. But like you said, like, these practices of self-reflection are so, and getting clear and getting intentional. Like, I love that that's where the book goes, because yeah, it's, if you've got a clear mind and an intentional mind, it is a superpower. But if you're
Yeah.
not clear and you're not intentional, it can really, and we see it in the lives, touch wood, and unfortunately more lives than we care to admit, like, yeah, spiraling out of control and wreaking havoc. Yeah, left
Hmm.
unchecked, huh?
Yeah,
Mm.
for sure. Well, we all
Yeah.
know how it feels. We've all been there. And the other thing, like, we'll feel it again. It's just, the more you work on this stuff, it's like any, I draw it back to physical exercise and sports again. Just, when you're training and practicing for the event, you're not trying new things during the event, but you're relying on your training. So it's no different when it comes to your mental fitness, right? Like, something's going to come up in the day, it's going to rock you. You're going to feel, you could feel cluttered, or you're not sure where to go, but then you can just pause for a second and rely on all that training you've been doing, and then it goes, right? And then
Mhm.
you're back on your plan. You're reminded of, okay, well, I'm doing this because I'm trying to head here, or these are the things that I know will make me smile right now. I've got
Mhm.
this. I know if I meditate for 5 minutes, it's going to give me at least a mental break, a little bit of a mental massage,
Mhm.
right? Or if I start 3 minutes of breath work, immediately I'm going to feel a difference.
Mhm.
We have access to all this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. And I totally resonate with what you're saying. And this was actually a question that was coming to me earlier in the conversation. So I'm going to try and stitch it in here now.
Yeah.
Do a bit of hack surgery. But I remember you mentioning like the decision making, and it sort of segues into what we're talking about. Because, yeah, when you're unclear in that space, and I've been finding this recently, And it's a bit to admit, like, I'm meant to be Mr. Inspired Evolution, but I'm on my journey. I'm inspired. I'm involving everybody.
You're human.
Yeah, totally, right. And I get these triggers, like, and I've gotten really clear on what my triggers are now. And it's like, if I had an expectation for something to go a certain way and it didn't, I go, whoop. And if I didn't see something coming and it goes and it sort of drops in and it's not it's not like appealing, I kind of go, whoop. And my whoop actually is this internal anger. Like, it's this frustration that emerges really, like, palpably, right? And what I used to do, and this has literally been a game changer, probably we're talking less than like 10 months I've been working on this. What I used to do was just take action out of that place. It was like, whoop. And it's like, whoa, no whoop, unwhoop me now. Literally like reacting.
Take it out with action.
Almost embarrassed to admit it, but like, seriously, taking massive action in my whoopness, right? Literally whooping my own ass in many ways. And that was the point. Like, I'd look back the next day or a week after and I'd go, I thought I was taking like 10 steps forward to either reclaim my position or get back on top. Mm-hmm. And I look back and I was like, I did nothing but dig myself in deeper. Like, I really did nothing but dig myself in deeper. And yes, a practice of self-reflection helped with that. But then the impetus the thing that dropped in for me was really, now I spend as much time with that mental fitness conversation that you're sort of alluding to with myself and go, don't bite the hook. And that's really like, it's like a mantra. It's like, don't bite the hook. Like, I can see whoop, and like understanding the triggers has been really helpful. And then I go, oh, that's the hook. Yeah. And I go, ooh, yeah, go on.
Well, I was going to say, you've been gifted the pause, because it's that pause that, there it is, versus just running right through it.
Right through it. Right. Yeah. And running on autopilot. Yeah. And it's been such a game changer, because, and also, like, alluding to the mental fitness things you were saying, was I've realized that, okay, that's happened, pause, like you just described. And then on the back of there's still this massive drive in me to like wanting to like sort of beat down the dragon, But I realized I need a sleep and a workout. Like, that's honestly, and it's like a formula now. It's like a sleep and a workout, because after a workout, your endorphins kick in, everything shifts, and like all the biggest problems dissolve, because it was like you're back in your body. And then a good sleep, and the next day you're like, so how do I really want to tackle this? And it's like, it's not that big a deal. Just,
Well, you're playing out the formula, right? The things that you just mentioned right there are intentional actions and decisions you're making, because the sleep and the workout do something for you, right? It doesn't have to be more complicated than this. We just need to spend a bit of time identifying those things, those decisions, those actions, what we can do, and then we just deploy them when they're needed, right? It's, I love it. Great example.
Awesome. Thanks,
Glad you shared it.
So I'm just tuning in. I'm conscious of the time, and I just, I want to talk to you more for longer, but I've got this intention to try and keep them tight. Yeah. And I don't want to leave the audience sort of hanging, because I did ask, like, I will ask you at some point, what are some of your favorite questions? So what are some of your favorite questions, bro?
I mean, this is always such a hard question, because I'm a huge believer that the best questions are very individual, and they land again when
the timing piece. I knew you were going to say that. Awesome.
Right.
Yeah.
So for me, like, if I think, like, even with the book, there are so many questions in there, but in 6 months, if I've done my job properly, in 6 months from now, my favorite question should be different.
Yeah.
Right. So for right now, the question that I'm thinking about the most it actually comes inspired by Chip Conley, an author, and he self-describes himself as a modern elder, which I love. And it's just, how can I be the most curious person in the room? And I love it, because, what I came to in writing his profile is to, to be the most curious person in the room, you're also the most present. And I've been sitting with that a lot more, and especially, doing, just interviews and whatnot for the book and stuff. And just to be like, this is a perfect example. I mean, you and I can obviously talk for hours. That's obvious, but just even just, right, just list like being fully present with you and curious what question you're going to ask or how you're responding to our dialogue, and then just letting that flow. And that's something that I marry that up with actually the first profile in the book, Cal Fussman, and it's just, how can I ask the best questions? Because when you do that, when you ask the best to ask the best questions, you have to be present, and you put in the work before you write your list of questions that you want to know about, but then you just rip that stuff up and you're just there and you trust your mind, the questions come up, right? So for me right now, it's all about curiosity and being present.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that, brother. Really, really appreciate it. And again, thank you so much for not just today and doing this here with us, because I know it's a lifetime's of work that's informed, your process and your journey to be able to inform this conversation we're having today. So thank you so much for all the work you've put into yourself, and so gracefully and so openly and vulnerably sharing yourself. Just I can feel the rawness and the depth of which we got to really meet you today. So thank you so much for bringing your whole self to this conversation. And on behalf of myself and the Inspired Evolution audience, brother, wishing you all the best on this journey. And I truly feel like, if it's cool with you, we'll do this again, because there's still so many itches left to scratch.
Absolutely. And thank you for your energy. I mean, that's I'm in Canada right now. It's Friday early evening, and I'm just, as you can see, smiling ear to ear and just energized. So thanks for jetting me into the weekend over here.
Touch wood. Thank you for your blessings, brother. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like, leave us a comment. And if you want to stay in tune for new episodes launching every Monday, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video. Stay inspired to evolve.